Good afternoon and welcome back from the break. We now move into a vital session titled Old Buildings New Tricks, Retrofitting for a Net Zero Future. The building sector, which accounts for 33% of India's energy use, presents a significant opportunity for decarbonization through retrofitting. With the right measures, we can reduce energy consumption, enhance resilience, and align with climate goals. Today's discussion will delve into the policies, market drivers, and strategies needed to scale retrofitting across building sectors, addressing challenges and uncovering new possibilities. This is going to be a bit of an interactive session. There will be a Mentimeter for a poll, which you can scan. If the second question doesn't show up, just refresh and it will show up. So be ready to do that. There are QR codes on the tables as well. Moderating this session is Ms. Shabnam Basi, Deputy CEO and Secretary of Griha Council, followed by our expert panel, Mr. Anish Kadyan, Senior Executive Director, CBRE India, Mr. Manjunath MD, Head Lifecycle Solutions, Carrier HVAC, Mr. Prasanna Deshpande, Vice President, ABB India, and Mr. Soumya Mittal, Director, Paharpur Business Center. Please join me in welcoming them all to the stage.
A very good afternoon to all of you, and I'm quite sure that the morning sessions have been extremely insightful, and this session before lunch we will ensure that we ignite some enthusiasm around the retrofit agenda. So we have amongst us very experienced group of experts from the industry, and we would like to understand from their experience that how can we drive this conversation around retrofits and make it more useful, not only for the industry, but also for the policymakers. Just to set the background for today's discussion, I think we all agree that India is fast moving towards its net zero targets of being carbon neutral by 2070. And if we want to move faster on this agenda, we will have to look at both new as well as existing buildings. And we all are aware that buildings consume nearly 33%, which includes both new as well as existing. And there is immense potential that lies not only in terms of energy savings, but also reducing emissions and looking at comforts and overall contributing to the climate goals, energy security, and creating green jobs. Keeping that in mind, I think the government of India had some concerted efforts in this direction, and way back in 2009, Bureau of Energy Efficiency had come out with a manual on retrofits, and to give a greater push to how these retrofits will work in the industry, they had also done an empanelment exercise of ESCOs to bridge the gap, the financial gap where investments could come in. So they started this exercise of empaneling ESCOs, and as I hear from my panelists today that they still continue with this empanelment exercise and they still have this there. However, this did not take off the way it was intended, but I think the idea was that, in terms of technicality and in terms of finance, there are big gaps. And it became a responsibility of the government to not only look at how we deal with it in terms of providing more information to the industry, but also bridging this gap financially, and also looking at how human behavior could be looked at in the long run. Apart from that, Even more recently, Bureau of Energy Efficiency has come out with a detailed manual on retrofits, and this largely looks at how they can assist the facility owners, then also provide more information to the end users and policymakers on developing those benchmarks for existing buildings, and provide a detailed approach on developing a very comprehensive energy management portfolio for their own projects, together with commissioning schedules and MNV protocols. So this has been a recent work, and apart from that, even at Griha, we have a manual on existing buildings where we try and push energy efficiency. Apart from energy efficiency, we look at sustainability for existing buildings, and we try and see that how these projects can be looked at for ratings and how they can achieve sustainability in the long run. With that context, I think we will begin today's discussion. So we have some preset questions for our panelists today, and this has been designed as per our understanding on the project, on the subject today, but definitely we would like to hear more from you, and we would like to have questions from you at the end of today's session. And to begin that discussion, I would like to ask my first question to Mr. Anish Kadyan, that how does real estate companies and how does government agencies encourage investments in retrofit projects rather than looking more at demolition and rebuilding? I think that's not viable in terms of resources and also in terms of the kind of waste that it generates. So what are your initial thoughts on that?
Thanks, Shabnam, and good to meet all of you. And of course, thank you to AEEE and Dr. Satish and his team for getting everybody together on this platform. And it's a very important topic, this retrofits. And I just start just so that audiences are connected. Anybody's heard of this concept called the ship of Theseus? It's a old Greek kind of a logic statement or a philosophy statement.
I think
Anybody
with a
heard
show
of
of
it?
hands, we can.
Greek ship of Theseus? Yeah, so very few. But what it basically says is that if you change something over a period of time, does it remain the same? So the thing in the ship of Theseus is, if you change all the wooden planks of the ship, does it become a new ship or it remains as the same ship? I think that's what we do in buildings. We retrofit buildings, and yes, they change. They don't remain the same buildings because that's the nature of buildings. That's the nature of the expectations from the building owners. Second question I just want to ask is just a show of hands. How many of the people who are here are part of any real estate developer, like somebody who's owning buildings or running buildings? Can you just maybe show your hand? Operating buildings as well. Okay, there's only one guy and he's from my company. So I think, why I ask this question is because I attend a lot of these industry forums about building services and how to manage buildings better or building efficiency, but I don't see the stakeholders from the building owner side. So what this basically says is that it is our job as people who are servicing buildings to push these agendas. So for example, energy efficiency, better chillers and all. It is our job as I would say the whole industry to push it to developers because their focus is different. They're looking at tenants, they're looking at how to increase their rental yields and all that. Whereas we who are operating buildings or running buildings or like the manufacturers are there, how can we build on this agenda? And I think this is where retrofits are important because retrofit encompasses everything. So your question basically was on how to increase investments in it, and instead of demolishing building, how can that be more relevant to do retrofits? So I think the best it's just I would say the best way to share this is the proof of the pudding lies in eating the cake. So I'll give you you all have heard of Empire State Building, I'm sure. It's one of those iconic buildings in the US. That was a lot of case studies are around retrofit of that building. That's too far away. Let's talk about Delhi. We're all part of Delhi. So there's a very large building in CP in the central Delhi area. It's a 50-year-old building. It was built in 1972. And we, as property managers, we came in, like I'm with CBRE, so we came in 2008 or 10 with them. And they underwent an entire retrofit process. Now what that did was, it was a 2-year process. They spent a lot of money on it. What that did was, they were able to get some of the best tenants in that building. in that area because of the retrofits. So they did the chiller retrofit, the lift, the lobbies, the look and feel as well as the technical stuff. They got the best tenants, but getting tenants is not the end of it. They got the highest rentals. Their rentals increased by a significant amount. Even now, they are commanding the highest rentals in that market. So I think that itself is a good case study to showcase that when you retrofit, and especially older buildings, there's straight away return on investments. It might, and the horizon is not too long because it doesn't take too much to retrofit buildings, maybe 2 to 3 years, but the paybacks are much more, the intangible paybacks are much higher. So, but what's happening now in the industry is this is becoming more of a expectation from tenants. So especially multinational companies, large Indian corporations, because they have their ESG goals and their net zero goals, they want to get into buildings which are sustainable, which have low cost of operations, of course, but they're sustainable. So if a developer does not retrofit his or her building, the chances that the existing tenants will move out, and that's one which is bad, plus the newer tenants will not come in. When a large tenant, say a multinational company, wants to take say 100,000 square feet space, the RFP specifies that you have to have these green certifications, this should be your efficiency of your air conditioning systems, and older buildings don't qualify. So it is kind of an imperative, I feel. So it's kind of a push right now. Developers have to take that call. That's what I would say.
No, I think I completely agree that it has to be developer push, but I think policies and regulations will also give a greater push because, if we know that what benefit there are for the owners in terms of, if they go in for retrofits, that will make it even more, acceptable for tenants to adopt these measures in their projects. And of course, one thing that I think is becoming a very big challenge is in terms of financial mechanisms that are lacking. And in terms of green finance and looking at low interest loans for such projects would be another area that the projects probably would like to look at when they look at retrofit projects in the long run. So, okay, I think thank you for setting the tone for today's discussion. So with that, we have our first Mentimeter question for today. So we have prepared some questions for the audience to see that what interests and where we are going in terms of these discussions. So with that, if someone can help us with the first question, please. Okay. So I think the first question is there with us, that what are the biggest barriers to energy efficiency retrofits in your area? So I'm sure you have been able to scan this Mentimeter contest with us, and as you can say that the highest answers that we have received are in areas of lack of awareness, and initial high costs. So I think these are the answers we hear from the audience, and of course, we need skill. Workforce is another area, and regulation hurdles is also been pointed out in this as an answer. Thank you so much for those answers. So now we will move on to a very, very critical area, and that is the HVAC. So my question would be to Manjunathan that, we have talked about, we know that air conditioning is one of the biggest retrofit solution in a building. So of course, we would like to know from you that how do retrofits, advanced HVAC systems, and recent technologies, they help to enhance the energy efficiency efforts and support the building transitions to net zero. What would be your take on that? Along with that, of course, addressing the intersection that HVAC systems have with ESG and governance tools is something that we would like you to address.
Sure. Thank you for that question. So I want to actually basically start off by giving a little bit of a background, to how HVAC becomes a most critical element in a building retrofit. I mean, you already mentioned it though. Some data points here, 40% of energy-related emissions is actually on account of buildings. In a building, 50% of the emissions, the energy consumption is on account of HVAC. That translates to about 22% of GHG emissions. I'm talking about not embodied emissions, operational emissions. So HVAC from our operational emissions perspective becomes a very, very important aspect to look at when we're looking at retrofits. The other element is For any HVAC company, there is an intersection on the ESG goals. As a HVAC company, there's an intersection with the supplier ESG goals and with the customer ESG goals. Now, if you put the scope 1, 2, 3 emissions in those 3 different buckets and look at how a HVAC company's emissions overall are, about 99.8% of a HVAC company's emissions are actually on account of scope 3 emissions, which is upstream from suppliers and downstream from end users. Now, if you do a further Pareto and look at how much is the emission on account of downstream from an end user perspective, it's about 91%. So what I'm trying to emphasize here is for an HVAC company, it becomes absolutely important to work with its existing customers and new customers and go back and give those retrofit solutions. So whatever energy savings are achieved through this process, and the emission actually rolls back into the HVAC company as their sustainability reporting process. So it becomes extremely important for HVAC companies to work with the end users and do those energy audits. Now, speaking about energy audits for an existing building, that's the first step forward. We do an energy audit, go back and give those energy conservation measures. Now, there could be 5 energy conservation measures, 10, 20, depending on the scale and the ROI. So the energy audit goes back and gives a report asking for ECMs. Now, in ECMs, the first thing that possibly can be thought of is an equipment retrofit, right? I mean, just do a like-to-like replacement, or maybe in some cases do a deep retrofit, take out, realign them and then make sure that they're working well. But today, I think we can't stop there. I think something that needs to be done beyond that. Just going back on my point, as far as the energy efficiency is concerned, some of the assets that we build and deployed in our end user places is actually 30 to 40% more efficient than what it was about a decade back. So energy efficiency we've already achieved. So the aspect that most HVAC companies have now focused, also from a standpoint that most HVAC companies have said, being part of the SBTi net zero pathway, have said that we will take a 1 gigation goal. That is, we'll work with our end users and help them reduce 1 billion tons of emissions, 2020 to 2030 being the sustainability decade. Before 2030, most HVAC companies like ourselves, Carrier, has taken a goal of helping customers reduce that 1 gigaton of emissions. So digitization, I think that's the most important aspect when it comes to now achieving those those savings or carbon emission reductions. When I talk about digitization, there are a couple of elements. One is an edge AI device, and the other one is a IoT platform. Now, before we get into digitization, some of the assets that were probably supplied maybe a few years back are not communicating to the IoT platform seamlessly. So the biggest challenge is we'll have to kind of deploy those contraptions that can actually have a dual feed mechanism. It can communicate the asset information to the cloud and to the existing BMS system. Coming back to the plant room retrofits, you've taken out an equipment, put a more energy efficient equipment, you've done deep retrofits, and you put an autonomous edge AI device, which is basically capable of doing, taking decisions in the plant room itself. Like, for example, floating set point. Floating set point is a very important element, right? You don't have to necessarily set the chiller to operate at 7-degree leaving chilled water temperature. It can be, it can go up to 11, 12 in most cases, depending on the written water temperature. And what is the potential there? There is, with every 1 degree raise in leaving chilled water temperature, we have a 3.5% savings potential in terms of the whole building energy consumption. So that's huge savings over there. So edge AI deployment, I think it becomes a very, very critical thing. And then moving on to the cloud platform, and this edge AI device is capable of many other decision making in terms of making the plant room very energy efficient. It can, stage cooling towers, it can run more number of pumps, and all of that it can do. Speaking about the IoT, the AI platform that's available on the cloud, can give predictive insights now. So if the asset is able to communicate to the IoT platform, we can actually tell the end user that in about 6 weeks' time you're going to have a compressor failure, or in about 8 weeks' time you're going to have a gas leakage issue, right? It helps, right? For the end user, both more from scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. Everywhere there's an impact, with these kind of predictive insights coming in there. I think I'll stop there. The more points to be added, maybe we could do it in the course of this.
Thanks. I think that very well explains the technology and how AI can become an integral part of driving the systems in future. So a connected question, Prasanna, probably for you. In what ways do retrofits such as HVAC systems, electric motors and drives, and building management systems enhance energy efficiency and leads to cost savings?
Thank you, and again, big thanks from my side also to AEEE. Very pertinent question, but also just taking forward from what Mr. Manjunath said. I mean, just to give a little basic context on when we talk about retrofit for renovation of buildings, right? So, when we look at these, we look at, especially with respect to sustainability and net zero, one thing we are looking at is the energy source, right? So, example, what is the current energy source? Is it conventional energy? Is it renewable energy? If it is renewable energy, is it captive or is it something which you are buying? Makes difference, right? And even as a backup energy, whether we're going to use DG or we're going to use battery system. I think in conversation we had, why battery systems will become much more important in terms of sustainability, probably, right? So, energy source would be one important aspect to look at when we look at retrofitting. The second and the most important part which we are conversing now is the energy efficiency itself. When you look at energy efficiency, it could be lighting, it could be electric motors, putting variable frequency drives, especially for variable torque application like AHUs where you kind of save a lot of energy. Probably I talk a little bit more on this. But also on the compressor side, you're talking about heat pumps. I think you mentioned about heat pumps earlier as well. So heat pumps coming something. And then on top of this is the building management system, which you also mentioned. And how do we integrate the whole thing? So there are different, you can say, different areas of energy efficiency where we could look at and improve. But I just want to add a couple of things more on sustainability, and that's on the environmental side, right? So when we talk about environment, it's also how much of, not only how much of CO2 you emit, but then when you retrofit a building, what can you do around the building to make it much more greener, and then add to the environment. And I would say, look at also the social requirements. And people are there, outdoor buildings means people. Then is the occupants same? The kind of occupants are similar or they are different? What are the cultural needs? What are the generation needs? I think that's also changing as the buildings change. So these aspects are equally important when we look at retrofit of the old buildings per se. Very specifically on the motors and drives, electric motors, if you talk about the standards, efficiency standards itself, like any other star rating, you have I1, I2, I3, I4, I5. That's the efficiency rating in the better of the efficiencies, I1 to I5. Just to give a context, when you talk about an I3 efficiency motor or an I4, these motors have 20% lower losses than the previous category, which means an I4 motor has 20% lower loss than I3. So an I5 motor will have a 20% lower loss than I4. So that's just to put a context. Second thing which we have to be mindful is that a larger rating of motors have better efficiency, which means a 1.1 kilowatt motor will have low efficiency, 11 kilowatt motor will have a little better efficiency, 110 kilowatt motor will have much better efficiency. So why this is important is because there are two ways of looking at the HVAC itself, the AHUs. One is use very small rating motors, multiple, that gives you certain flexibility, reliability, availability. But at the same time, even with the best of I4 efficiency, you're not getting the best because you're using small power motors. So look at, can we integrate and go for larger ratings, still looking at reliability in terms of availability or parallel operation. So this is something which can happen in the retrofit case in a big way. And here I would say efficiency of I6 are also kind of already technologically available. And in India, the minimum efficiency standard is I2 still. And if you look at EMA figures, probably a big chunk, we're talking about 70% plus motors are still I2. But the good news is buildings have gone ahead, at least I3 and probably moved to I4, but many of the green buildings have gone to I5. So when retrofit, this is a good opportunity to move from the old I1, I2 to an I5 directly, what is best available. And why this is important is, good part is motor has a very long life, 20, 25 years, at least 15 years, nothing happens. That's a good thing. But the other thing is then you don't change, right? Even if the new technology comes, you don't change. And Indians, at least my grandmother has always taught, phenko mat. Don't throw anything, utilize karo, utilize karo, utilize karo. And that's not very good from energy efficiency perspective. So to go for the best efficiency class, especially on the motor side, would be the best thing when you retrofit. You add a VFD, really is good because for variable frequency, variable load requirement, this makes a lot of sense because your HVAC is not running at full capacity always. So at partial capacity, VFD is the best. Though VFD, when you add on the motor, the efficiency of the motor drops marginally, but on a system side, it gives you a lot of advantage. So that's the benefit of VFD. Within this motor-driven system, obviously the compressors, the fan, equipment become very important. Choose the best available on the market at that point of time makes a lot of sense. And the interesting part is that, we always say that individually we are all good, but when as a combined, are we the best? And this is a question which comes as a user, end user, right? You buy the best electric motor, the best drive, the best driven equipment, fantastic. When you put it together, if that is not the best, then what is the use, right? And that's where the IEC standards are kind of coming in and then pushing in, saying that not just each equipment, but when a motor is driven by a drive and driving a pump, is this motor-driven system the best? And you declare the efficiency of your motor for this operation, the drive at this operation, the pump at this operation. And then the client decides, if my operating profile is around this, A, B or C, which is the best? And that's the best way of evaluating, and that's very difficult job because most of the designers are interested in the new buildings. On the retrofit buildings, probably there are retrofits coming in. I mean, that's the challenge, I would say. But there's a lot of room to play. I'll just end with one live example, and the example is from our own, I would say, our own factory. We retrofitted a building, existing building in our premises. It so happened that during COVID, we decided that we had our corporate office in WTC, World Trade Center. We said we'd move that into the factory premise, make it more efficient, come closer. And then this was a two-storied building, an old building. We decided to retrofit with 3 stories building. And then we had a lot of good opportunity to work on this. So what all we did, one is, as you said, the deep retrofit. It's kind of a deep retrofit in a way because we kept the structure same, everything else got changed. The electric motors went into an i4, i5 motors. We put VFDs, we put a lot of smart sensors, smart sensing devices into the thing because as you rightly said, it has to go to cloud. You need to digitalize quite a lot. So we did a lot of smart sensing activity into that. We have used our own equipment, our own motors, drives, our own measuring products. We also put our own BMS system, ABB's own Cylon BMS system into this to do the retrofit kind of a thing. And it has been working very well. But what we also added, according to me, was a good thing is, we also moved from the energy source. We moved into some captive energy, generation, but also we moved into the, renewable energy. So we went to RE100 here. So that was a good reason why we would go. Worked with Terry to get water positive. I think that was a fantastic learning from us from Terry as well.
The entire ABB campus is water positive.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
That is something that is the recent work that we have done with ABB, and that has been a learning experience on both sides.
Absolutely. From ABB side, big way, I think, learning from Terry on this water positive. So, and also, because this is a factory premises, we also went, let's say, zero land, land to waste kind of a thing. So there are a lot of learnings around this, but one last thing I wanted to add here is, we didn't make the just building efficient as a retrofit, but we also added a lot of greenery around. And when we talk about net zero, there are 3 things. One is decarbonization, we did by energy sourcing. We talk about energy efficiency part. The third part is the sufficiency. After all, the people who are around there also have to get some kind of behavioral change, and that is sufficiency. There's a lot of encouragement for people to use staircases. I mean, there are a lot of systems kept in so that using staircase becomes easy. A lot of greenery around the building. So we encourage people to have their short meetings, outside in a green environment. You reduce the load. So I think this is quite a big ecosystem possible, not just the equipment, also behavioral changes which are possible to do this. So just wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think,
just one more thing on the retrofit side. I think you covered the entire spectrum, but one thing which is, I feel very important, is the building envelope and that plays a lot of part in terms of the energy, the heat transmission and all. So that also is very, very important whenever retrofits happen to build up the whole deep retrofit.
Yeah, from a HVAC perspective, passive cooling, right? I mean, I think it's a very important element.
No, absolutely, absolutely. That's very important, especially if your HVAC has to be efficient. I totally agree with you. Yes.
So thank you so much for touching on all the three aspects of energy sourcing, how energy efficiency can be improved, and deep retrofit solutions can be looked at in the long run, and how we can work together to look at an energy efficiency projects and actually achieving efficiency on ground, and of course behavioral changes and how the behavior of the tenants and how we look at the retrofit projects in terms of how we use them. I think that also becomes very critical in terms of any retrofit model. So now I would like to come to Soumya Metal, and I think we have some very good experience on ground, and the Paharpur Business Center has been one example which I think we all must have seen at least once, and we all have known that this is the most efficient retrofit example that we have witnessed. And I think we just discussed when we were having a briefing meeting that how this journey began and what are the challenges and key strategies that were adopted when they started this work. So probably, Soumya, we would like to hear more from you on your experience while you start doing this and where you actually landed when we were engaging more with the tenants.
Okay. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to bring a owner-operator point of view to the discussion. We run a commercial office building in Nehru Place. It's about 50,000 square feet. The building was constructed in the 1980s, and we've been running it as a flexi office space for the last 30 years or so. The challenge that we had was, whilst the building was state-of-the-art when it was constructed, over the last few decades, it's, let's put it this way, it's become old. The first challenge that we had was we wanted to improve our lease rentals. So everything which drove us, it was not an altruistic point of view, it was hardcore commercial. We wanted to improve lease rentals. So we said, okay, fine, the one way to increase lease rentals for from the tenants that we are targeting is to get our building back up to a grade A status. We started the journey pre-COVID. It got stuck because of COVID, and all our potential clients started working from home. Now they're sort of coming back to work. Our first challenge was in finding consultants, architects, service providers who would want to take on an old office building. Retrofitting an old office building and bringing it up to spec is a much harder job than designing a new building. And not every architect wants to do it. We went to architects, they said, no, we don't want to take up a retrofit project, it's too much work. So we had to really hunt for somebody who would have the interest in actually taking on the project, because a lot of the work which is required to be done only happens when you start retrofitting it. So you can't design upfront, you have to design it on the go, and not every consultant or every architect wants to do that. Then the first question that the consultant and the architect ask us is, what do you want? Okay, and then that was the second challenge, is we had to be able to, and we are still sort of in the process of doing it, so for us it's a live example, is we need to put in specifications to the architects and consultants, and what is it that we want from a specification perspective. A lot of architects and a lot of consultants, they just want to do a very quick job. Just design it and get out, design, get out, design it, get out. But a retrofit project is not just quick design it and get out. It's a lot more work from a systems perspective, from an architecture perspective, because you have to adapt and you have to change what has already been built. So, I mean, there's a lot of challenges, and I'm sort of happy to sort of discuss it during the Q&A. But I think making sure that you have a commercial reason for doing what you're doing. And for us, our goal was to improve our rentals by at least 30%. And that's what was driving the project, the commercial. and by making sure that you have a team and that you set standards for the team in terms of design. That is, I think, those are the two critical things. And if the owner operator is not interested in doing this, आप कितना भी वो architect कितना भी बोल लेना, वो कुछ होने नहीं वाला है. Because unless there is demand from the owner operator, and there's hardly anybody in this room who's an owner operator, you can give as much gyan as you want, but unless there is pull from the owner operator side, it's a very hard sell. There's also a misconception that retrofitting and building it up to spec costs more. Yeah, it does cost more, but not really, because you can save in both operating costs and you can save both in terms of the equipment that you're supposed to put into the building. You can get all that cost back. So it's not much more expensive. Or let's put it this way, if you do it right, it's not at all expensive. It's the same cost. And to a large extent, there is a lack of awareness amongst the owner-operator community in terms of why should we do this. There's a lot of issues which are there, but I think they're addressable. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you touched two important points. One is the drive to start a retrofit project. So when we are owners of project, then the drive to do a retrofit project is more, because we know that we are going to pay the bills. But when the tenants are driving the whole show, then it becomes fairly difficult. But definitely, you touched upon a very critical topic of expertise in the market, and I think that is also something that has to be addressed in the long run if we are looking at long-term solutions. So I think moving forward from there, I think Anish, I'd like to come back to you. Now, he touched a topic on property valuations and how commercial aspects it drove the retrofit solutions for their project. So in your opinion, how do we influence the property valuation in urban spaces, particularly in terms of market demands, and how compliances and regulations are looked at the same time?
So I think very important, and I think Swami brought it out, that ultimately for a developer it's all about commercials. You cannot just do it because you want to make a green building or whatever. Ultimately it has to make business sense, and that I think will ultimately drive all these decisions. And this is also what the industry is now seeing. Primarily, I think because one, of course, the ESG awareness is increasing, and then there's a global awareness about climate change and all, but the entry of a lot of funds into real estate. So if you see the international funds like Blackstone, Brookfield, they're into it. In India, our own funds like Godrej, they're all investing in buildings. And for them, this is it's a cycle. So they will invest, they will get into a building, and then they will exit when the valuations become.
They work on that ESCO model.
Yeah, no, not ESCO model. These are all basically they're buying buildings. They're buying all the buildings or putting equity into it, and then they want to exit at a later stage. So how can you exit? You will only exit when you make money, right? When the valuation of the property increases. So that is where the retrofits are now happening. So for example, there is a large fund which bought an asset of an Indian developer about 8 or 9 years back. They pumped in a lot of money across the portfolio. There are 4 buildings, about 12 million square feet. And over a period of time, they changed the chillers, they improved the air conditioning systems, the AHUs, they put in easy fans, a lot of stuff that I think you both brought out. And piecemeal, they brought these assets to a much, much better state now. And of course, the rentals have all gone up, their yields have gone up, and now with the entry of REITs, for people who are familiar with that, but for the audience, REITs are basically real estate investment trusts. So it's like a multiple owners for a building now. So there is government support for that as well, regulations are there. So there's a broad basing, and there is now, I would say, that push from the developer side as well to upgrade buildings. So these big buildings, it's happening. The smaller buildings, unfortunately, are still not doing it, but seeing this, of course, they're also taking up those things, and we are seeing it in terms of increasing the valuation. So that is from the owner side, but like I said earlier as well, the major push is really coming in from the tenants. They really want to, their employees everybody's aware, conscious about green and climate change, they want to be in buildings which are eco-friendly, which have good air quality. I think Soumya's building is, you didn't talk about the air quality part, but that's, I think, a classic example of how one key aspect of a building, the USP of the building, pulls in tenants and increases the rentals as well. So I think that is where we are seeing it. The question about regulation and incentives, it's a very touchy subject. I'm not too sure if there are people from the government sector here, but there are many people from the policy side. I'm sure you grapple with this about incentives and regulations. My take is generally the industry works better with incentives. As you can see, for example, the additional FAR which was given, that really boosted the green certification, the green building movement. But sometimes you do need regulations as well. BE is a classic example. The star labeling is made mandatory, so that's helped increasing. There's a fine balance, but my sense is if the government or one of the policies can incentivize retrofits, like you said again, maybe it does cost money. How can you have maybe say subsidized loans for older buildings, or when you retrofit and you get a certification? There is right now no certification that I'm aware of on existing retrofit. So can that be an incentive for developers to go in for retrofit and then reduce their operating cost, as well as, of course, reduce the environment footprint?
Right. I think one, of course, you touched upon is an upfront cost that goes into any retrofit, and that becomes a major cost for any retrofit solution. But then there are savings that you keep achieving over the life of the building. So I think when we look of incentives in existing buildings to drive that through regulations become a very big challenge, because it will all depend on the quality of the retrofits and how much savings one achieves. And that can be very, very subjective. That can vary from building
and how to measure the retrofits performance. That's
yes.
always a challenge. Even in basic air conditioning retrofits, a lot of developers are hesitant to take it up because they're not sure whether the performance will really change, or it is because of work from home, for example.
Yeah.
The whole operating pattern has changed, so the savings, the costs have come down because of something else. So that finding out the measurement is sometimes difficult. If that can also be brought into the whole, I would say, ecosystem, that will help developers to go in for retrofits.
Right. Great. I think you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to quickly add on to that. So basically, we started off with digitization, right? I mean, I said that digitization becomes the most important piece, basically making those asset pieces that you've deployed there to communicate with the IoT platform. Now, a related thing would be remote warranty and remote monitoring, remote warranty, right? Yeah. So remote warranty basically works like this. We are able to access our assets and then make sure if there are any challenges that are going to be coming in from a predictive maintenance or predictive insights perspective, we're able to kind of manage it remotely. So it does a couple of things. One is scope 3 emissions for the end user is reduced, right? We don't have a technician traveling from one of our offices to the end user site and then burning that fossil fuel and then carbon emission, that's reduced. The other thing is M&V and recommissioning are important aspects. So every year it's important for us to go back and look at the chillers and the plant room and see how much has been the energy consumption, because we started off with an energy audit, then we said, okay, we do these deep retrofits and then we put it in a state which is more acceptable to ASHRAE. Let's say we went ahead and did an energy audit and we found that 1.1 IKW per TR was there, which is way too high. ASHRAE says no, it is 0.7 is a requirement. So we put an edge AI device there. We set everything in a way that it is operating at 0.65 kW per TR. Now today the technology allows us to monitor that on a continuous basis, right? I mean, you can actually, with your handheld device, you can see whether the chiller committed IKW per TR is not getting delivered or not. And the other thing is when we go back and do a recommissioning, so we can actually move the bar a little more and see, from the machine learnings that we've had, we can actually adjust the operation. So, and the cloud and making the assets communicate to the cloud platform and then digitizing it, I think that's technology is available, it's only an adoption thing. And adaptive cooling.
Basically, I think technology has enabled some way to measure, that's what you're, I agree with you. It's just that the penetration of technology and the confidence is what we have to build as a community, I think.
Absolutely.
I think remote monitoring is a very great way to, look at buildings when you have buildings at multiple locations, and Infosys is one great example who have done it through monitoring from remote locations, and even RBI buildings for that matter followed a similar pattern. So Prasanna, I would like to come to you with this connected question that we have just heard from the previous speakers, that how building performance can be monitored remotely. So what is your take on how do smart meters work in this process, and how technology can help us achieve the desired results?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Before I come to that point, just to add to Anish, this building which we had retrofitted at ABB, we were able to save energy of double-digit energy saving, and that was a target. And not only that, we retune a lot of parameters, periodically, because things are not the same always. And the benchmarks are only going higher, I would say, in that sense. And this building is LEED, gold certified. So yeah, so by USGBC, yes. So that's possible, and that's possibility of getting this. Coming to the digital part of the thing, totally agree with you. I think that's where it is going. The IoT cloud not only makes monitoring simpler, easier, but the analytical layer which is coming on that, makes it a lot of flexible. Not only for deciding something, but also communicating and then sharing for some other activity, because data is data, and we always say humans have very good insights if they want to. Different people look at data differently, and then they come with different insights. Now, when you talk about digital, you put a digital layer on an equipment like compressor, pump, motor, which are not intelligent. Now you put a digital layer on that, you put a sensor, it starts to become intelligent. So you can monitor the condition of the equipment. Why condition of the equipment monitoring is important? You don't want to have a downtime, right? So that's very key. Not only downtime, what happens if an equipment fails? Because if you are monitoring well, you ensure that it is maintained correctly. You do a preventive maintenance rather than you do a predictive maintenance rather than a preventive maintenance. So that's a good part. What it also helps is that when you avoid a failure, you also avoid possibility of equipment performing with a lower efficiency after repair. Take an example of electric motor. If an electric motor winding fails, you get it rebound, the efficiency clearly drops by 1% to 5%, just drops. A lot of studies you have also done, right? If you avoid a burnout of the motor by right condition monitoring, you are actually already doing a right job in terms of the sustainability and energy efficiency. So that brings in the condition and the performance. And when different equipment start to speak to each other, both machine to machine or let's say machine to human, whatever way, then then you get the control layer, which is through also BMS. And you rightly said, the data can go to the BMS as well as to the cloud, right? Dual feed, right? So makes a lot of sense because there is a data. From the BMS perspective, you start to control, not just monitor, control. And just look at the complete system. You have an electric motor driving a pump through a VFD. All these data are going to the cloud. The flow of the pump is measured through a smart flow meters, which is again going to the cloud, the pressure. Then you are also doing through smart meters the energy consumption. Over a period of time, you start to understand this. This is the periphery in which the whole system works the best. Now, can you work around this for the most of the time? Then you are again improving those few points. So I would say digital layer is very important. AI is coming much more on this. Having said this, one kind of obviously fear factor why digital also has, apart from the knowledge itself, as a barrier is the cyber security. People are really worried on cyber security. What would happen, if the whole thing gets attacked? Even more so with, you can say even more important assets like RBIs or data centers, so on and so forth, becomes more important. And here, it's very important that it's not one player who can do it. It's collaboration between multiple organizations, including regulatory, because now very clearly where the data is going. It's a regulatory thing. So I would say it's a superb time we are, where a lot of things are available, but also a lot of collaborative possibility. Even within this panels, I would say, there's a lot of collaborative, only possible through digital, I would say. Yeah.
I just also wanted to add to that. The data security issues, cyber security attacks, ransomware attacks are going to be there. But as long as we don't make the IoT AI autonomous, right? There's a one-way streaming of data. The data is picked up from an end user and populated in the cloud, and you run your algorithms there and then give an insight. So as long as that is taken care of, I think it's largely secure. But once AI and IoT platforms become autonomous, like they are able to kind of stream a command back into the BMS, and BMS has to work on maybe reducing the frequency on your drive from 50 hertz to 45 hertz, then it could be a problem.
Absolutely.
So we haven't reached there, but I think a good starting step is, the data streaming is happening, it's going to the IoT platform, and there are predictive insights coming back to us, yeah, so.
Absolutely.
I think great insights, because AI and they have a great way to go. And as you rightly said, if we start having this data at one point, then there are many issues that can be looked at, also from the regulator point of view, and of course improving efficiencies in the long run. So I think
just one thing to add. It's a practical thing happened. For one of the very large oil and gas customer in their office, we had put some sensors, and this gentleman who was heading the electrical, we were showing him dashboards. He just turned around to his colleague and he said, "ये Saturday air conditioning क्यों चल रहा है?" I mean, we never even thought that this is the insight what this gentleman would get. We were talking about condition monitoring of the equipment. This gentleman just said, "ये Saturday air conditioning क्यों चल रहा है?" I mean, so data is.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put the things in that perspective. So coming to you, Soumya, I think we have talked a lot about how air conditioning systems and how envelopes play a very critical role, and these will be the top ECMs when we look at any retrofit solution. But in your opinion, we have also seen at the Paharpur Center that it has greatly improved the indoor air quality and comforts and productivity of the people who are operating out of the Paharpur Business Center. So what strategies ensure that these benefits are maximized, and how has this been made possible in the project?
For us, indoor air quality was something that we always did. So for us, when we are sort of looking at a building retrofit, our goal is to make sure that we improve what we are doing. Indoor air quality standards in India are very lax compared to global standards. WHO specifies a PM 2.5 of less than 5 on an average. But the Indian standards are much, much higher. Indoor air quality has many components. It has particulate matter, it has also CO2 levels. For us, from an energy efficiency perspective, our goal is to make sure that, well, to a certain extent, indoor air quality and energy efficiency are two different parts of the spectrum, right? Indoor air quality, if you want to improve indoor air quality, you have to pump in fresh air. And when you pump in fresh air, you have a challenge, because you need to either cool it or you need to heat it. And it's not energy efficient to either cool it or heat it, because you're using no energy. And if you don't pump in the fresh air, the CO2 levels inside the building go up, which is not good, especially when we take CO2 as a proxy for other environmental
Absolutely.
Issues. There are a couple of ways that we've sort of tried to address it. One was using plants inside the building, but not everybody can use plants. It's very manpower intensive. I think what we need to focus on is energy recovery, which not everybody sort of does. From a tenant perspective, what we found is that very few people pay a lot of attention to indoor air quality. Primarily because the people who are paying for the, as an operator perspective, the only way that we can gain from indoor air quality if tenants are willing to pay a higher price, either in terms of lease or in terms of the operating cost. And the challenge is that the people who are paying for the increased lease and the increased operating cost are not sitting in the building. They're sitting in some other location, and they are not affected by the Delhi air quality. So it's a question of education. It's a question of having people demand that you need to have better health. That's why, to a certain extent, the leasing companies play a big role in educating. But even to a certain extent, at the end of the day, everybody wants a lower rental, right? वो health का चलो जो है सो है. If the boss wants to have a better indoor air quality, he'll put an air purifier in his room. and everybody else can sort of doesn't really matter. Those are the practical realities of the situation. Unless there is a mandate from the top that no, we need to make sure that people have better air quality. COVID was a big wake-up factor where suddenly having better indoor air quality means that you can actually come to the office. So पहले तो कुछ नहीं होता था, but now COVID made sure that okay, fine, you need to make sure that health is becoming a huge factor. We want to make sure that people don't get sick. We want to make sure that if something like this happens again, we are not forced to have people die or do whatever else. So I think COVID was a make or break as far as indoor air quality awareness was concerned, because suddenly it's not about the cost of the building, it's about you are paying people to sit at home and do nothing. And that is a factor which is way higher. Your salary cost is like maybe 30, 40 times more than what the building operating cost is. So I think that was a big factor in indoor air quality.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to kind of build on to that point. There's a very, very important aspect that you bring in. COVID, actually there's a pre-COVID HVAC design and a post-COVID HVAC design. Now, pre-COVID design, we would emphasize on recirculating air, because you're actually using the same cold air and then making sure that the energy efficiency aspects of both from a air handling side and the chiller plant room side is taken care of. But post-COVID, we want more fresh air coming in, right? As we take more fresh air, we are adding more load to the building. So that's when this filtration systems came about, right? I know we are doing upstream filtrations for the fresh air coming in and downstream filtrations. So we're adding more filters, adding more, again, pump, VFD, actually, retrofits become a very important thing. So the pre-COVID and post-COVID HVAC scenario, I think, is a very important element to look at. We are not looking at recirculating air now, we are looking at bringing in fresh air and filtering that and making sure that the indoor air quality or the AQI is maintained. Yeah.
Right, great. Some great conversations and some great insights from the experts on the dais. And although we do not have time, but still I would like to take a few questions from the audience. Yes, we can't? All right. So I've been informed we can't take any more questions. So probably during lunch, you will have the opportunity to interact with our panelists and take these questions offline with them. So we are very sorry about that. But thank you very much, all of you, for being very supportive and coming out with those observations. And with that, we come to the end of today's session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please come ahead for a group photo. I'd like to invite Mr. Jayanta to felicitate our panelists.